Hi there, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this APMG webinar, which is focused on how to kickstart your robotic process automation journey, or RPA journey for short. My name is Mark Constable. I'm part of the team at APMG, and it's a pleasure to be joined by Jan-Willem Middelburg, who will be the main presenter for the session. So Jan-Willem's the author of the Robotic Process Automation Framework and the Managing Director at Sybient over in Kuala Lumpur. So the topic today, our RPA has really taken off in the last few years. It offers huge potential benefits to organizations that implement it. It can be from operational efficiency to innovation to capability. And if you're new to RPA or in the early stages of adopting or assessing suitability for your organization, then this session is for you, because Jan-Willem will cover some of the key things you need to know to get started and to ramp up your adoption of RPA. But before Jan-Willem gets into the detail, I'll cover a few bits of housekeeping just before we get started properly. So the first thing to note is we are recording the session, and everyone that's registered will receive a follow-up email once the recording is available online, so do look out for that over the next day or so. You're welcome to submit any questions at any time throughout the session, so please feel free to do that. You see on your GoToWebinar control panel, you will have a little questions area where you can type those in. I'll be keeping a close eye on those throughout, and we'll hopefully address as many of those as we can towards the end. And last but not least, your feedback is very important to us for planning and delivering these webinars in the future. So any feedback, positive or negative, is gratefully received. So I think that's it from me. So without further ado, I'll hand things over to Jan-Willem to get started on all things RPA. Over to you, Jan-Willem.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks as always for the very, very kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be back here again and to share a little bit more today around what all the hype is around with RPA, what it is, but specifically how to get started. So what I've done for today is to prepare a bit of an agenda where we're going to dive a little bit deeper than just the introductory part. We're going to look a little bit more in detail what are some of the essential components of RPA and what you need in order to get started. The way that we're going to do that is by looking at an RPA automation journey, and we're going to be sharing some practical tips around how you can get started by yourself, how you can define the maturity of your current organization, and I will show you a bit of what the process is if you're going from zero automation towards a fully automated enterprise. Last but not least, I will also share a little bit around the new APMG RPA Foundation exam, which has just been launched, and we'll conclude with that to showcase everyone who wants to learn a little bit more around this. So let's get started. One of the main questions I typically receive when we start the discussion around RPA is, how is it different? Haven't we been talking about automation processes, process automation for many, many years? And the answer to that question is actually yes. RPA is not trying to solve a new thing. It's not necessarily a new technology, but it's just a convergence of a number of technological developments that we've been seeing in the past few years. And I always like to start with what is the end result? Why should you start considering this? What you see on this first slide is that any business, literally any business, whether you're in oil and gas, insurance, healthcare, is under pressure constantly. And that pressure is coming from new technology, it's coming from growth, it might be coming from facts that are outside of your control, like the pandemic that we've seen in recent years. It can come from competitors, new markets that are coming up quite quickly. So that's always there, and it has always been there. On the other hand of that story is that we still keep a number of priorities the same. Most organizations across the world are busy with increasing their revenue, making sure that they get more and more loyal customers. They want to make sure that they attract the right talent to make sure that they can deliver the best kind of products and services across the world. And they need to make sure that on the last part, they are following required rules and regulations. So over time, these challenges and those business priorities have stayed more or less the same. So that brings us to the question, where does RPA fit in all of this? And I always like to start with explaining what RPA is, by looking at a number of different steps. First of all, the key thing to realize around RPA is that it emulates human actions. And what I mean with that is that everything that you do behind the computer can be simulated by an RPA robot as well. So if you start your day and you're logging into your machine and you're opening up an Excel file and then opening and starting reading your emails and then maybe sending invoices to customers, then with an RPA robot, we can track and trace exactly which buttons you click, which text you fill, which fields you copy paste from one application towards another. And that process can then be repeated. And most robots can do that faster than a human could. So that's the core essence of what RPA is and how it's going to be different from all kinds of other workflows, is because it's really focused around that human action. In order to do that, RPA needs to have technology to make sure that it can interact with any application or user interface. Because if we're really trying to mimic human actions, it means that we need to be able with the robots to click on the exact same button, open up any kind of application, regardless on which kind of computer or what particular infrastructure you're using. It also means that we need to process data which is in structured formats. In your day-to-day job, what a lot of people are doing is processing information. They're making contracts, invoices, proposals, and for that, they typically combine different information from different resources. So it's very fundamental in RPA that we have a way to deal with massive quantities of data on a day-to-day basis. And then the last two components of RPA are what is going to make it smart. Because whereas people start their workday typically somewhere between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m., regardless of where you're working, RPA can work continuously, 24 hours a day, in the weekends, during the middle of the night. And if we train robots to do that well, they typically also do that with a high level of accuracy. So the main thing that I really want you to take away from that is that with RPA technologies, we're going to exactly simulate what people do behind the computer. And from all the years that I've been in this particular field, the technology nowadays is so smart that it can very accurately track what people are doing behind the computer. It also means that there are cases for which RPA is not so suitable. So if you are, for instance, in the creative domain and you are designing new buildings, or you are an architect and you need to come up with very creative solutions, then in most cases, one of the things that you do behind a computer are unique. And therefore we can try to repeat that or simulate that, but it's very difficult to repeat one-off kind of actions. So but the reality is that most people in most large organizations do things on a very repetitive basis, and therefore RPA is very, very useful and can help a lot to do that. So from that, those key characteristics, there's a second layer that I want you to really understand, and it kind of starts with my topic around how do you start implementation of RPA. It is that you first and foremost should look at automation as a tool. Just like you're using software, just like you might have different other tools in your workplace, it is a tool that can help you fix things quicker and faster, but it's just a tool. And that means that ultimately RPA is not invasive. It's not there to replace jobs, as we frequently hear. It's not there to take over the work that humans do. It's there as an assistant that can help you become way more productive, way faster, and therefore be able to compete against other businesses. If you do RPA well and you have started with a number of automation workflows, you will also very quickly see that it's very easy to scale and that you can run it at any time during the day, and that it is also very future-proof. And what I mean with that is it doesn't really matter if there's updates to your systems or applications. RPA and workflows can be very easily altered to accommodate that towards the future. Good, so now that you have a little bit of a better understanding of what RPA is all about, let's talk about the official definition. There's three main paragraphs that I've chosen for the slide today, which are coming from the textbook. And the first thing to note is that RPA is low to no code commercial off-the-shelf technology. What I mean with that is that low to no code typically means it's very easy to use. You don't need to be an IT specialist or have a programming background in order to build workflows, or at least not the very complicated ones. Most RPA solutions today, and there is a scala of very good products, have very easy drag and drop kind of functionality with which you can click very easy workflows very quickly together. The other thing that that definition entails is that it is software. With automation, a lot of people still have in the back of their minds these physical robots that are moving products or pieces from one place to another. But that's not the case. RPA technology is specifically software. And that means that you're actually purchasing software licenses to get everything up and running. The second main key takeaway that I want you to get from this is that if we look at RPA benefits, the very quick and most motivating business reason is very simple. Through RPA, you can automate a significant share of enterprise workloads. In many organizations, if not all, there is a large number of repetitive processes. Think about the fact that you need to file your taxes every year, that you would need to file your expense claims, that you need to make contracts for new employees, that you need to make contracts for customers, that you need to do invoice matching in a finance environment, that you need to do annual reviews with all of your employees. Every organization is characterized by the fact that these processes exist. And typically, the larger the company, the larger the number of processes that need to be managed. This is where RPA can bring very significant benefits, because by starting to implement these workflows, we can significantly reduce the amount of work necessary to do so. And then last but not least, and this is one of the key topics I'm going to expand on a little bit more in detail today, is that RPA is not just technology. Many people who start with automation solutions think of it as a tool that can be implemented and can be controlled. But what I've learned over the last 5 to 6 years that we've been working with RPA implementations is that first and foremost, it is around a mind shift change. Working together with robots and looking as automation as a business enabler requires quite a big shift in the way that people operate, in the way that they think. It also requires quite some alteration towards your existing processes, because how are you going to control robots? How can you benefit from them? How are you going to use different workflows that are running across different departments? So it's not just about the technology. There's a lot more that comes into play. And in order to move towards an automated enterprise, and people who've been on my webinars before know that I'm a very, very big fan of service automation. If you move towards any organization that is delivering automated services, you need to also change the way that people look at automation. You need a profound culture change to achieve that. So we're going to look at that a little bit more in detail today. Good, couple of key things why you should be interested in this, and I'm very glad that you took the time to join the webinar today. But note that in my opinion, automation is coming to every organization, large or small, profit or non-profit, government driven or within the commercial domain. And you see from the research here on the slide is that in almost every boardroom, they're now talking about automation. Here you see a study from The Economist that 84% of automation executives feel that it's an executive responsibility, and that from the companies that have started with automation, more than 73% are very or entirely satisfied with the returns that automation is bringing. And this has also been my personal experience. I've been involved in dozens of projects over the years, and there's never been any kind of company or organizations that after a year or 2 years said, well, let's go back to the way things were because that was actually better. All of them saw the benefits and started to say, hey, we need to accelerate instead of keeping the same pace. So it's going to become very, very relevant. And I typically like to explain the way in which automation is transforming businesses by looking at some of the big disruptive technologies in companies in the last few years. We're all aware that companies like Amazon, Uber, and Netflix completely changed the way that they leverage technology and operated a particular business. Amazon did that for internet, Uber or Grab did that specifically for mobile-first applications. Netflix did that specifically for cloud adoption. With automation first, there's no ultimate winner yet. There are a couple of companies that are very far ahead in this domain, but in my very strong belief, you're going to see that companies that implement automation well and start to have a service automation mindset is that they are going to be the next big companies that we're going to see tomorrow. Because through automation, it becomes just simply more efficient, it becomes more customer focused, and in most cases, that also means that it becomes a better customer experience. So what do I mean with that exactly? Well, in order to understand that, let's have a quick look at what automation can do, and then we can start to see what the effect of that will be on a service experience. So as I explained in the original definition, the core objective of RPA is to emulate a person by executing manual repetitive tasks. And I'd like you to think for a moment about the repetitive tasks you are doing in your job on a daily basis, or maybe on a monthly basis. There's always tasks which you need to do from your boss or because they are just mandated by law, but that you don't really enjoy doing. If I look at my own personal situation, I don't really like filing expense reports at the end of the month, but it's a necessary evil that needs to be done anyway. And in order to deal with that, you can start to look at how can we expedite that process. So to kind of give you the example that I've been using, I've been building a quick robot, and I just drag and drop all my receipts into one folder. And at the end of the month, the robot basically all puts that automatically into the system. It attaches all of the receipts very nicely towards our accounting system, and it just sends me a message that my expense report is ready to be filed. I'll do a quick review and then I submit it. And I'd like you to think about that for yourself. What is a task in your day-to-day job that you really don't like doing and that you could wish you could automate away? And if you think about that a little bit more deeply, you also can start thinking about how much time it would save you if you were able to actually automate that away. So that's the main thing that automation is going to do for you. And it's very clear, just like with expense receipts or with sending out invoices or any kind of process-oriented task that has been done, is that what the robot is basically doing is making a number of what we refer to as rule-based decisions. It's not going to creatively or magically design a house, but what it's very good in doing is go through spreadsheets, Excel lists, Word documents to extract and input information. And last but not least, automation can integrate with virtually every existing application. There's a couple of exceptions to that rule. It's very, very custom-made or very, very ancient. But generally speaking, 95% of applications can, with a single few clicks, be integrated within RPA solutions. So what that is going to bring us is a number of critical business benefits. First and foremost, it is speed. So I can do things faster, quicker, and better than competition. So that is going to bring me a lot of benefits. Everyone is nowadays talking about digital transformation. In my opinion, RPA is one of the most tangible forms of digital transformation you could do at any moment. What a robot is also very good at is increasing your compliancy and therefore making sure that you are auditable, trackable, and traceable. If you ask a robot to follow reports, let's say at 2 minutes past the hour, the robot will always, every single day, file that report at 2 minutes past the hour. No exceptions, no mistakes, no vacation days or the fact that somebody was stuck in traffic. So automated processes are typically way more predictable and easier to adopt and control than manual processes. In many cases, automated services also bring an improved customer experience. And I say deliberately in many cases, not in all cases, because you need to do this right. People like, especially in today's day and age, to have answers to questions quickly. They want to make sure that they receive instant service. But what they don't want is the feeling that they now need to talk towards a robot that is not providing them with any answers. So finding a good balance in that journey is of crucial importance. And last but not least, and I think that this part is very frequently underestimated, is that automation also brings a lot of benefits towards the internal organization. Many people are always afraid around jobs, and I've been on dozens of conferences in the last years, and the question I always get is, how about the fact that automation is going to take our jobs away? And the answer I always have in reply is, well, if you walk towards any, I typically call them data processing departments, so where they're processing invoices, dealing with incident tickets or anything that's repetitive, and you walk up to a desk there and you ask them, well, do you really enjoy in the morning that you have a list of 100 items that you need to clear in order to start your day? The answer is frequently no. People are not generally enjoying repetitive, simple workflows. And what RPA can literally do is help to get rid of that so that you have way more time for the more creative aspects. So generally speaking, in most companies where RPA was adopted, you start to see that employee satisfaction is is going up instead of down. Robots are not replacing jobs, they are making the lives of the people who need to do those jobs much easier. And I think that that is an element that is very frequently underestimated. Good, let's have a quick look then at the more practical sides. So what I've already tried to explain to you is that what a robot can do is emulate any human action. So if you want to get a better sense of what robots actually do in real life, think about all the things you do behind the computer. You're opening up applications, you're creating new documents, you're moving one document from one folder into another. You might access specific data or read and write to databases. You might Google, go to the web to find specific information that you need. You're copying, pasting information, let's say from a passport towards a contract, or from a vendor record towards a proposal. You're sending out emails and attachments towards customers or colleagues. All of these actions most people do on a day-to-day basis. And the wonderful news of this slide is that all of those actions can be done by robots as well. And when I started my talk was saying that, well, the key thing that an RPA robot is trying to do is emulate human action. That's what I literally mean. I mean, literally copying any kind of human action that you are doing behind the computer. So in order to give you some examples of where that is done, think about all of the places in an organization that do a lot of process-oriented work. And there's a couple of usual suspects. Typically, they are combined in shared service centers. That's why RPA is tremendously popular within shared service centers. And those are the processes that need to be done in finance or in supply chain, in IT, HR, or customer service. What all of these different domains have in common is that they are tremendously process-driven types of organizations, in which there's typically high volume, a lot of pressure to clear a lot of volume very quickly, and that also almost always have a specific service component in the form of a specific process. So in finance, examples are making sure that we process an invoice all the way towards a payment, or within the IT domain that we log what is happening within specific systems or dealing with incidents. HR is maybe one of the most monthly driven oriented processes. Every month we have new employees, there's new payroll that needs to be done. So all of these different domains can benefit and are benefiting from robotic process automation. These are the usual suspects. You're listening in today and you haven't started at anything in terms of automation yet, These are probably the most simple use cases that you could get started with tomorrow. All of these are existing, they're proven, there's a huge return on investment, and you can start with these examples quite easily. Good, so what I've done in the first 20 minutes is hopefully giving you a little bit more of a background and information around what is RPA, what is it trying to achieve, what are some of the key characteristics, and where can it be used. And at this moment, you might say, well, I've been listening in for the last 20 minutes. I now have a bit of a better understanding, or I already had an understanding. But the next question then is, where do you get started? And this is by far a more difficult question to answer than we can discuss in just the next 15 to 20 minutes. But I'm going to give you a summary, and I'm going to share some of the best practices that we've been using with our customers and our clients around what is a good and suitable approach. Because from my experience, it's way more than just buying a RPA software license or just sending one person towards a training course to be the new RPA developer. As I mentioned already at the start of this webinar, RPA is going to be a culture change as well. So let me explain what I mean with that. What I typically see, and this is a model that a lot of organizations are using, is that in order to start adopting automation, there is a particular journey. And at the bottom of the slide, you see the word automation maturity. Means that as you get started, you will become more and more proficient. And it always starts with one team, one specific department, or sometimes even one individual that is going to showcase what automation can be and what it can do for an organization. Maybe that one person is you listening to this session today. In almost all cases, automation starts with what we refer to as a proof of concept. The proof of concept is going to showcase what automation is bringing, what the benefits are, but only at a very local level. So for instance, if somebody's really fed up with the fact that they need to answer, let's say 500 emails every single day, that person can start thinking about, hey, what if I automate this workflow away? I'm going to start building a workflow that can deal with these questions. And this way, my job is going to become much more easy. So the first step is typically the easy step, because it is very much focused towards single or limited number of applications. It's also very much focused towards a limited set of data, so it's not across an entire organization. It's very easy to contain. Where it becomes much more difficult is if you move towards the second stage, which is the established phase. Because after that proof of concept, you need to make sure that you grow awareness, but also that you grow the number of people who are enthusiastic and that are willing to spend time and also money to bring automation further. Typically, this is the critical stage, because here you need to convince, by lack of another word, other departments of the benefits of automation. And because the pilot project was typically done not within that department, it makes it extra difficult. So the establishment phase is very crucial. If RPA projects fail, it's typically within this phase where the initiators are unable to move the project further. Then stage number 3 and 4 are when the significant part or the majority of the rest of the organization starts to get involved. In the expense stage, you typically start with communication campaigns across the entire enterprise, looking at establishing procedures and processes, making sure that there is multiple robots running across different departments. And then in the last stage is typically where you start seeing a scaling effect, and multiple different units or multiple different countries start to adopt these kinds of workflows in their day-to-day work. This is typically how an automation journey looks when you first get started with it. In order to kind of convert that into numbers, you could, and this is all rules of thumb, but it kind of shows you in each stage what will be the scope and what will be the different priorities. So as I mentioned already, in the pilot stage or in the proof stage, it's all very limited. Typically, it's an initial kinds of projects, very limited number of robots running, and also very limited number of RPA processes that need to be designed. The establishment part is where it's becoming difficult, because this is where you start to scale up. So you don't, you're no longer dependent on just a few individual developers or a few people who are driving this project. This is where you start to see that it starts to expand. And that brings all kinds of other difficult enterprise questions. So for instance, if a robot is touching sensitive information or it's processing information from sensitive materials, let's say customer records or medical records, how do you deal with that? How are you gonna track and trace that a person didn't alter records, but for instance, that a robot did it? So from an auditability and from an accuracy point of view, you always need to make sure that there's very clear overviews of who has altered which particular records. So in the established phase, and you can see this in the third bullet, you need to start thinking about security. You need to start thinking about data privacy. You need to also start thinking about reporting, which robots are have failed, or where did a particular workflow not go as planned. So those are the typical questions that you see in that second stage. And then in the third and the fourth stage, you see that it starts to become more formalized. So typically this is where organizations start to define and what we refer to as an RPA Center of Excellence. So one specific department that is going to be busy with robots. You start to see that RPA starts to get across the enterprise, so across multiple functional areas. And that the development of new automations and new workflows typically becomes much more structured. So this is where we start to build pipelines of future automation. So this is more or less a maturity model that we typically follow when it comes towards the adoption of automation. If you're listening and you deliberately signed up for this How to Get Started webinar, you're probably in the first or maybe second stage, because that's where I reckon most companies are right now. But another main thing that I want you to take away from this session today is that you can also start to look at capabilities and maturity by assessing where an organization is today. And what we always do, and this is also what we explain in the RPA course, is before you get started with any form of technology implementation, start with a capability assessment. And start looking at, does an organization have the skills and capabilities necessary to be effective within RPA? And what you will see here on the slide is that there's 10 main RPA capability areas that organizations need to assess. And they're bundled into two collections, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. And only 4 of those are technical. So capability is, obviously you need technical capabilities, you need tools, you need to have knowledge around security, the way to deal with credentialing, privacy, etc. All of these are technical components that you will need to master. But maybe more importantly, in order to set up a good RPA environment, you need to set up RPA program management. And at the bottom 6, and I typically call them the core credentials, and this is where you generally see the most discussion, is around how are you going to operationalize RPA. So suppose that we now have a number of robots running. How are you going to make sure that you have an operation that is supporting that is comfortable with that, in which people have an opportunity to work with robots and alongside robots? And in order to do that, you need to start thinking about an operating model. How are you going to make sure that this is done on a day-to-day basis? You need to start thinking about, how do I set up an adequate program that can deal with RPA on a longer-term basis? How are you going to structure your reporting, and especially if robots are responsible for the reporting? Think about HR, and how are you going to be making sure that people are comfortable with robots and that they know how they can alter them. In almost all cases, there is technology involved, and even though it's in most cases low to no code environments, you will need to make sure that people know how to design and master these specific robots. And last but not least, process improvement and operations management, making sure that there is processes in place that support the robots and that you are changing your organization to cater for these new processes that are being delivered. And then last but not least, and this is where it becomes a little bit more for larger types of automation environments, you also need to think about scheduling resources, which robot will go first in case that there's a conflict, how do you deal with outages, or if a robot has run into a problem. All of these areas you need to address on a day-to-day basis. But the main message I want you to really take away from this slide is that RPA is not so much around technology as it is around the human aspect and the cultural aspect and the program management aspect. So when you start your RPA journey and you start thinking about what can we do, yes, you obviously need to have technology, and it's nice to look at all kinds of very cool vendors with very nice kind of solutions, but also think around the internal and the operational and the project management side, because that's really required in order to make RPA more longer term successful. Good, so I hope that provides everyone a little bit with some more deep dive into the RPA domain. I'm going to finish my talk today with the reference towards our APMG's Robotic Process Automation course that we just launched, which has been out now for a little more than 6 weeks. And one of the critical capabilities that you will need, as we've just seen in the previous slides, in any case, is knowledge. You need people to understand what RPA is, but maybe more importantly, what it isn't. You need to make sure that people understand what it can do. You need to make sure that people understand how to set up an RPA organization. You need to make sure that they understand those 10 different capabilities that we just discussed, and give them a basic idea of how to design RPA workflows and processes. So what we've done with the service automation framework is that we looked at a vendor neutral approach. There's many also very good courses that showcase how to use specific technology. But what we focus on in this course is how do you set up an RPA organization. We're going to look at what are the underlying technologies, how do you safeguard quality and efficiency, what are the fundamental techniques that are underlying this. So throughout the modules today, I've given you a bit of an overview already of some of the key topics that are covered. Obviously, the course goes a lot more in detail, and I strongly recommend everyone who's listening to start taking this in case you're really interested to learn a little bit more. APMG now offers the qualification examination. So if you want to get this exam done, you need to sit for a 1-hour exam in which you need to answer 60 questions with a 65% pass mark. So with that, Mark, I would like to open up the floor and see if there are any questions that might have come in during this presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan-Willem. Great stuff there, really insightful, and I'm sure a lot of food for thought for those on the session today. We've got a few questions I can see at the minute, so we'll start with one that's very topical. I think all of us are seeing a lot about ChatGPT at the minute in the news and in various applications. So, question is, how do you see ChatGPT and RPA combining?
Well, it's basically a match made in heaven. What most, well, if not all, RPA tools now already have is a ChatGPT integration. So what you can actually do is build now the answers that ChatGPT is providing into your workflows as well. So in RPA, so RPA is only the process. So we take, for instance, input data like a question from a customer, and then ChatGPT might provide the answer, and that answer is then automatically processed or generated back towards it. And what I really think is that ChatGPT is going to speed up RPA and automation adoption even more, because it now becomes possible to make things like complicated calculations very quickly. So in the older days, I needed to program hard codes, specific rules into a program, for instance, to do a complicated calculation or a formula. And now what you could just do is, in layman's terms, explain this to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will just give you the output, and you can process that output. Of course, there are some risks involved with that, because you kind of need to trust that they will give the right answer, but it kind of eliminates the need to hard code a lot of the stuff that was necessary before. To give you another example, if you ask ChatGPT about a specific exchange rate on a particular day, let's say 3 years ago, quite sure that they're going to give you the correct answer. In a regular automation, you would need to build that into a query into Google and then look up in a particular table, which is all possible, but a lot more steps than this version, which is obviously way faster. So yeah, as I said, I know I'm expanding a little bit because it's a topic I really like, but in my opinion, it's a match made in heaven.
Perfect, thanks, Jan-Willem. Next question, in your experience, where are you seeing RPA most commonly deployed?
Well, I think that by the session, the most common answer to that is everywhere where there is a lot of processes. And I showed one slide that with the most common use cases. And if you combine that, you could say that the #1 target for RPA is everything that is happening in the shared service center. So whether it's finance, HR, IT, supply chain, operations, those areas of an enterprise which have a significant number of processes, that's the prime target for RPA solutions.
Great, thanks, Jan-Willem. There's a question, which RPA tools are used on the learning process? So I think I guess that's relating to the course you were just covering. So yeah, what sort of tools are covered?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So before I answer that question, is note that we really try with the framework and with service automation, also RPAs, to kind of give a vendor independent approach. So there's already a lot of, I would say, very good technology courses available. But with the framework, what we're really trying to do is keep an open mind. Obviously, there are tools which are at this moment very popular and that will obviously be covered within the course. So without any preference in order, but we're going to be looking at tools like Blue Prism, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Microsoft Power Automate, Open RPA. All of those are tools that will be covered in the course and that you will learn a little bit more about. But we're not going to be specifically recommending a particular tool set.
Okay, thanks. And there's another question on the sort of training side of things. Can you share the training path of what follows after this foundations training? I think at this stage that's as far as R1 goes, isn't it?
Yeah. So typically, after the training course, you will be, I would say, suitably equipped to start with any RPA project. You can speak the terminology, you know what it's all about. There's a lot of materials around how do you set up an RPA environment, what kind of resources do you need to think about, what kind of project planning, who are the key stakeholders. So that's what this course is aiming to do. Most people who then start on the RPA implementation journey will also go into a technical course of their choice. So if it's a specific tool that you've purchased, then probably you will need a number of people who will go into a more development kind of course. So there's no plans at this stage to make an advanced kind of level. It's really a standalone program. But yeah, you never know how things might develop in the future. If we get a lot of requests and there's thousands of people asking us to develop a second level, then we will. But the course in itself is detailed and in-depth enough to be a standalone certification.
Great, thanks, Jan-Willem. This goes back to sort of very much more sort of general question on RPA. So is RPA open source?
Well, that's a difficult question actually to answer. So obviously the body of knowledge is open source. The concept is open source. Most of the tools that you will need for RPA are not open source, especially enterprise editions are typically where you would need to pay. But they do offer, in most cases, trial licenses or educator licenses where you can play around. There are examples of open source RPA tools. I just mentioned OpenRPA, which is one of the most famous examples of that you could use to do this. But what I've seen in my experience is that most larger companies choose a commercial vendor for stability and also for support. So that's the part. So it's open source in terms of knowledge, but from a technology point of view, it's driven by a lot of vendors.
Great, thanks, Jan-Willem. One final question. I think you've kind of touched on it already, but might be worth reinforcing a couple of points. So, can you recommend any particular RPA tools or applications?
No, not in a public webinar. If you reach out to me afterwards, I'm happy to, for a specific organization or specific case, recommend some tools. But I really like to keep it with our vendor independent approach. So I'm not going to be recommending specific tools at this stage. But if you want to have a more detailed discussion, then I can request the person that has a question just to drop me an email afterwards.
Sure, we can do that. No problem. No problem. Okay, I think that's I'm just checking. I can't see any other outstanding questions at the minute, so I think we can start to wrap up there. I usually cover a bit about the associated course and certification, but yeah, Jan-Willem's done that nicely for me already. So, and we'll cover this in the follow-up email. So, as I said at the start, we have recorded the session. As soon as that's available, the recording is available online. We'll send a follow-up email to everyone that's registered, and we'll cover all the links that we talked about and links to the course. So do look out for that. And I think that's it. I think we've covered training certification, we've covered the questions. So just leaves me to thank everyone for joining the session today. I hope you found it useful and informative. I'm sure you have some great tips and advice from Jan-Willem throughout. And thank you, of course, to Jan-Willem for your insights and expertise today. Really great stuff. So
it's always a pleasure, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Jan-Willem. Thanks again, everybody. And we'll see you again, hopefully, on APMG webinars in the future. So enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.